Right. Good afternoon. We're going to talk today, we're going to begin our discussion of triangular proofs and proving triangles congruent. So we're going to start with just the definition of congruent figures. Congruent figures are figures that have the same shape and size. Okay, they're identical, in other words. Okay. Congruent triangles are triangles in which corresponding angles and sides are congruent. Okay, triangles in which corresponding angles and sides are congruent. Okay, so triangles in which corresponding angles and sides are congruent. All right, now this is also known in shorthand when we do our proofs, known as C, P, C, T, C. CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. CPCTC. Just sort of rolls off the tongue. Okay, so if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then, and we want to talk about the triangle, so that means this triangle A is congruent to triangle D. Okay? Those are the corresponding angles. So angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle B would be congruent to angle E. So we would mark that with the same sign. So one curve for A and D, two curves for B and E, because they're congruent. So B and E. And then the third angle, C and F, would also be congruent. So we might mark those with, oh, come on. I'm trying to move this back. Okay, we're marking those with 3 lines, or 3 curves. So those triangles may have 3 different measures, they may not, but we know that those congruent parts at least, or those corresponding parts are at least congruent by definition. Okay. Now you could do this without a picture, because the corresponding angles are going to be the corresponding vertices. So if you notice that A and D are in the first spot, so they're going to be the corresponding parts that are congruent. Then we have B and E would be the same, because they're in the same spot in the name of the triangle. And also then C and F would also be in the corresponding angles. Again, you can tell by the naming convention, because they're in the same spot in the name of the triangle. So if you don't have a picture, you can do it from the name. So now let's look at the sides. Side AB, we'll mark with 1 hash mark, would be corresponding to side DE. So that would be the corresponding part that is congruent. Side BC would be corresponding to EF, so that would be congruent. So if we mark those, we could mark those with 2 hash marks to show that they're the same length. And we could go down to the base there and mark that with 3 hash marks to show that that's the same length. So that line segment or side AC is corresponding to side DF. Alright, so that's how you match, that's corresponding parts of the congruent triangles. Now let's look at this piece. We have triangle XYZ and triangle WMN, and determine whether the following statements are true or false. Well, we know that X is corresponding with W, vertex. Y is corresponding with M, and Z is corresponding to N. So, triangle YZX would be congruent to WMN. Is that true or false? Well, we have YZX. Well, Y should be the same as M. Well, that's not the first off the bat. We're not the same. We've got Y corresponding with W. So we know that that is not true. So it's false. Triangle ZXY is congruent to triangle NWM. Well, Z would match with N. That's good. X would go with W. That's good. And Y would go with M. So those all are congruent and in the correct order. So that would be true. And again, if you wanted to use highlighters, you could do that. You know that this is congruent, those two. And so we have X and W there. And we would have X and W here. And you see they're not in the same space in those two. But if they're one's in the same spot, you got to check them all. I mean, so we have Y and M. Those are matched in that part B. And then we have Z and N. Okay, so we have green, purple, yellow, green, purple, yellow. So that's good Mardi Gras colors, if nothing else. Okay, so that is congruent. C, Y, Z, X, N, M, W. Again, we can use our highlighters. We have Y should be with M. Well, they're not in the same spot, so they're not congruent triangles. So the answer is false. And Z, Y, X. So we have Y and we have M and we have X and W and we have Z and N. Okay, so again, they're in the corresponding parts. They match where they are in the name. So this D statement would be true. Alright, looking at the next example. Use the given figure and information to name 3 pairs of congruent angles and 3 pairs of congruent sides. Okay, so we have to be sure that we mark these matching angles and sides. So we know, first of all, that we have these vertical angles that would be congruent. So we know, but that one we have to name with 3 letters. Because, why do we have to name it with 3 letters? That one we have to name with 3 letters because that G is a vertex that's shared by both those triangles. So we have E, G, H would be congruent to K, G, F. Okay. Now, we also need to try to figure out why we have what we're going to have in terms of which of these others are congruent. And the corresponding angles in this, if you tried to flip this over directly, you would notice that you really needed to so if we go back and look, we're going to notice in the name, let's look, we know that G matches G. Use highlighters. G and G, that's right here. Those are shared. But then we have to check our name to see which of these others are actually the congruent angles, because it, it kind of looks like they could just flip over, but we're not sure. So E is congruent with K. Well, that turns out to be kind of alternate angles. And then we also have that H is congruent with F here. So you have to kind of be careful. When you watch your name, be sure you see where those angles are and where they match up. So our answer here, angle E, and that one we can name with just the letter because it's not shared with the other triangle, is congruent with angle K, and angle H is congruent with angle F. Okay. Now what about sides? Okay. EH, side EH, would go with side KF, and go from yellow to blue in this case, or from the starting angle that's congruent to the other matching congruent angle for that side. Okay, so EG then would be congruent to KG, and HG would be congruent to FG. So be very careful when you list these congruent angles and sides that you kind of notice where they are in the names and that you match them up correctly. That's the tricky part. Okay, we've got triangle ABC is congruent to triangle CDA. Now, we can do it by name, or we could do it probably, in this case, by alternate interior angles. But, well, we don't know for a fact, maybe, that they're parallel. So let's match up. A is congruent, A is congruent to C. B is congruent to D. So we have this and this, we know are congruent. And then C is congruent to A. Okay, so we've got a little problem. We've got A is really two angles. So on this, it doesn't tell us a parallelogram, which is a little, bothers me a bit, but we're going to, if we had, I guess we're going to have to assume that if these opposing angles are equal and these total angles here are equal, that must mean that the opposite angles are equal, that they are congruent, that this is a parallelogram. Okay, so since that's a parallelogram, then we know that we've got two parallel lines cut by a transversal, and so when you look at that as in that way, your parallel lines cut by a transversal, then these alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so your alternate interior angles would be here and here, and then this one and this one. Okay, so those angles are congruent. So now we have to figure out the angles that match. And again, some of these, because they are shared, you're going to have to name with 3 letters. The ones you don't have to name with 3 letters are B and D. So B is congruent to D. Said D and wrote C. There's D. Okay, now we have angle BAC. it's not written very well. Let me try to do a better job. Angle BAC is congruent to angle DCA, and angle BCA is congruent to angle DAC. And sides, starting with BA, that's going to the side that's marked with the angle that's marked with 3 curves. So that's going to be congruent, to DC, excuse me. And then we have BC is congruent to DA. And then AC on one triangle, which is if we look at that, that's going from the 3 hash marks to the 2 hash marks on the top triangle. We're going to call this triangle 1, this triangle 2. These are from triangle 1, these are from triangle 2. So AC in triangle 1 is going from the 3 curve angle to the 2 curve angle, the way I've got it marked. And then CA is the one on the other triangle, triangle 2, that's going in that same direction. So mark your sides going from, matching angles to corresponding angle to the other corresponding angle. All right. Use this next diagram to complete the congruent statement. Okay, so we know that triangle ABC, so that's going from the right angle, okay, to the triangle with 2 curves, to the triangle with 1 curve. Okay, this is A, this is angle B, and this is angle C. So how is that going to match up in the triangle on the right? Well, the right angle is angle D, the 2 curve angle is E, and the 1 curve angle is F. So ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Now looking at the next drawing, what information about the triangles is shown in those drawings? Okay, well, angle K is congruent to which angle? Angle K is congruent to angle L. Those are the ones that are marked with equal the same markings. Angle D is congruent to angle U because those are marked with just 1 mark. Okay, we don't know necessarily angle A and W, that's not marked. They would be the same. If 2 angles are the same, the third angle has to be the same. We could draw that conclusion, but this information is just what's shown. What can we get that is given when we're doing a proof? Remember, we start with what's given. So what's marked is what's given. So side DW is congruent to side UA. Again, go from the corresponding angle to the other angle. Okay, and then we know that side KW is congruent to side LA, right? KW would be congruent to LA. Okay, they've got those marked differently on the LU is what's marked as congruent. Okay. On the If I'm going by what's marked, LU is marked congruent. Now, that doesn't actually make sense, but okay, that's what's marked. So that's what we have to go with. All right, so that is what you would come up with on example 6. Now for example 7, if triangle DOG is congruent to triangle CAT, okay, so we know we can make a drawing. DOG, and we have triangle C. Now mine are not congruent, but we're assuming they're congruent because we're told that they are. DOG is congruent to triangle CAT. DO is 10. OG is 12. And DG is 16. Okay. AT is 2x plus 6. And what is x? Well, which side corresponds, which side is congruent? We know that OG would be congruent to AT, so 12 is equal to 2x plus 6. So then we just solve. 2x is equal to 6, and so x is equal to 3. All right, that is 9-1. So you can work on your homework now.